Hey everybody, Terrence here from Engadget. We are taking a look at the Motorola Droid RAZR, the latest superphone from Motorola, and their attempt to resurrect the RAZR brand name. As you might remember, RAZR debuted back in 2004 as a high-end premium fashion phone, and then quickly became a sort of commodity, one of the biggest selling handsets ever, and subsequent versions of it kind of dragged the name through the mud. This is Moto's attempt to return the brand to its former place as a premium handset and bring a little prestige back to it. The Droid RAZR has a few things in common with the original RAZR V3, most noticeably being its thinness. Now, while the V3 might seem a little chubby by today's standards, it was, at the time, the thinnest clamshell phone on the market, and even compared to many candy bar phones, was still considered pretty thin. Now, the Droid RAZR here is almost mind-bogglingly thin. This is 7.1 millimeters, which is quite a bit thinner than even the Galaxy S2, which amazed us with its thinness when it debuted a couple of months ago at about 8.5 millimeters. Now, this even makes the reasonably slim iPhone 4 look pretty chunky. So this is really sleek. It also has a primarily aluminum construction around the sides, which is similar to the original RAZR. But up front, you've got this Gorilla Glass screen and a Kevlar backplate, which is very, very slick, but feels quite nice. The handset is reasonably light, a little lighter than you'd expect, but it's not light enough to feel cheap and flimsy. It's got just enough heft to where it feels like a premium device, as the materials would lead you to believe. Now, it is a little wide in the hand, a little wider than we would like. You can actually fit the entire Droid X on the glass panel of the Droid RAZR, and this aluminum bezel is still outside of it, which makes it a little uncomfortable to reach across the screen, but it's not a deal breaker. Now, if you want to start looking around the sides here, on the right you've got the volume rocker, which has very little travel, but it's just enough so that you know when you hit it. About an inch above that is the power and lock button, which is has a sort of concentric circle texture pattern to it, so it's a little easier to identify. Now, up top, near the hump, where the camera is, you've got the 3.5 millimeter headphone jack, a micro USB port for charging and syncing, and a HDMI out port. Now, it's a little weird having to charge the phone from the top, but we presume that there just simply wasn't enough room at the RAZR thin bottom for that micro USB port. Over on the left side, there isn't really much to see, but there is this door, which is a plastic door and a little tough to open, which hides the micro SD and micro SIM slots. Now, these are hidden behind this door because the battery in the Droid RAZR is non-removable. Also around back, where the battery plate normally would be, is the camera. This is an 8-megapixel digital camera capable of capturing 1080p video, and there's a single LED flash as well. You'll also see there's the speakerphone, which is actually surprisingly loud and relatively clear. We were actually pretty impressed with the quality of it overall. Up front, you've got another camera, a 1.3 megapixel front-facing cam for doing video chats and, you know, taking self-portraits if you're into that sort of thing. Underneath the screen is your usual set of 4 capacitive buttons, and this right here is your Gorilla Glass panel, underneath which is a 4.3-inch QHD Super AMOLED Advanced screen. What exactly the difference is between a Super AMOLED Advanced and Super AMOLED Plus is, we're not entirely sure. We do know that the Advanced, like the Plus, does away with the pentile matrix layout, which some people have complained about. There is still a slight hue to the screen that some people might find a little off-putting. It's particularly noticeable at low brightness levels. Now, it might not look too bad right now, but when you compare it to, say, the Droid X and its old-school TFT LCD, you can see that there is a slight tinge to the color. As you go up in brightness, it becomes a little less obvious, but we were a little surprised, seeing as how one of the selling points of AMOLED screens is their relative brightness, that it didn't actually quite keep up with the TFT on our Droid X. You can see that it's the Droid X is significantly brighter and has slightly more accurate color reproduction. However, it is a little bit washed out looking compared to the high contrast and very saturated colors of the Droid RAZR. And honestly, you won't notice the difference in day-to-day use for the most part. It's really just something to keep in mind for those of you who are sticklers for that sort of thing. Now, underneath the hood here is a full gigabyte of RAM and a dual-core 1.2 gigahertz processor from TI. Now, it's not the fastest processor on the market, not the most cutting edge, but it should be enough to get you through most tasks. Android and Motorola's customizations, which we'll get to more in a moment, fly along pretty much without a hitch on here. It did pretty well in our benchmark tests, trading victories with the similarly clocked Galaxy S2, and in some and outpaced many of its competitors at the high-end Android scene. Now, Motorola has made some customizations to the Android OS, as you could imagine. At first glance, it is very similar to the Not Blur that they've been shipping on handsets recently, including the Droid X2 and the Bionic. But once you start to dig a little deeper there, you'll notice some differences. You'll see there's some new icons here. They're a little squarer, and they've added some new animations you can see as the light sort of shines on your icons and widgets as you switch from home screen to home screen. Now, unlike most of the handsets that Motorola has shipped recently, the Droid RAZR only has 5 home screens instead of 7. And there's a lot of sort of gaudy animations, as you'll see. Whereas with the handsets they've been shipping recently, when you hit the home button a second time, it presents just sort of this grid of home screens that you can switch between. The RAZR has this sort of flashy 3D wall of home screens that you can switch through, and it sort of flies in and out, as you can see. Now, when you want to move about widgets, it has a sort of similarly flashy animation. They're sort of wobbly and they move about, and this is really, honestly, the only time we noticed much of a hiccup with the OS as a whole. There was some stuttering we found when moving and resizing widgets, but for the most part, it was, as you can see, there you go, it just kind of like that. There are, of course, some carrier and manufacturer apps that come pre-installed, some of which are crapware, such as the Blockbuster app, some of which are not, such as Smart Actions. Moto Active is pre-installed for use with their fitness tracking Android running watch. NFL Mobile, Netflix, and all that stuff comes pre-installed. But perhaps the most interesting thing that is on here, and the only app probably worth taking note of, is Smart Actions. Now, this is similar to an app that some of you might be familiar with called Tasker, which lets you set a series of rules that tell the phone to perform some actions. Now, Motorola is pitching this primarily as a way to save battery life by enabling it to turn the brightness down or turn off Bluetooth when you arrive at a certain location using GPS tracking, or to turn off syncing at a certain time of day when you go to bed. But you can do all sorts of different things. You can see right now I have it set up so that when I'm at home, it turns the ringer up all the way, turns the Bluetooth off, and turns the brightness all the way down, since in the artificial lighting of my apartment, it's pretty easy to make out the screen. But you can also make it do other things. So, let's say, at night while you're hanging out, you get off the train, during certain hours, it'll automatically launch the social application to pull up activities, bars, restaurants, etc. that are nearby. You can also set it to do things such as play music, send a notification, a text message, change your ringtone, your wallpaper, launch apps. It's really just a an amazingly versatile tool. So there you go, everybody. The return of the RAZR brand name and its Motorola's attempt to place it once again in the upper echelon of the phone world.